If a heart could be traded for a balance sheet, Lady Clara Alistair had made the transaction 3 months prior. Now, as she endured the oppressive elegance of her own engagement celebration, the terrifying realization was not that she would marry the dull Lord Harrington, but that her gilded cage felt suspiciously like a grave, a suspicion only confirmed when a mysterious stranger, Mr. Elias Thorne, appeared from the shadows with a look of intense, knowing pity in his gray eyes and a cryptic note tucked into his palm. The ballroom of Lord Harrington's London residence was a dizzying, gilded cage. 300 flickering gas lamps challenged the darkness of a late May evening, casting a brilliant, unforgiving light over the assembly of the Ton. The scent of tuberose and political ambition hung heavy in the air, a familiar, intoxicating miasma that Lady Clara Alistair had learned to breathe without choking. She stood near the colossal marble fireplace, her posture a masterpiece of quiet dignity that belied the terror coiling in her stomach. At 22, Clara possessed a beauty that was often described as classical, a face whose lines were too fine, whose expression was too reserved to be considered merely pretty. Her gown, a shimmer of ivory silk that had cost far more than her family could truly afford, served as a cruel reminder of the truth. She was on display, a sacrificial lamb dressed for the slaughter. Her fiancé, Lord Harrington, was at her side, a man of 53 whose wealth was as undisputed as his utter lack of charm. He was meticulously tailored, rigidly correct, and possessed the unfortunate habit of speaking only in pronouncements. The funds allocated to the new Egyptian railway, Harrington was declaring to a captive audience of peers, his voice a low, self-satisfied rumble, will yield, I estimate, no less than 8.5% by the end of the quarter. A sound investment, Lady Clara, one you will find most agreeable to your settlements. Clara offered the prescribed smile, small, gracious, and utterly devoid of warmth. I trust your judgment implicitly, my lord. The words felt like ash on her tongue. Her judgment, she knew, would lead her far from this room and this man. But her father's judgment, his disastrous, reckless speculations in Peruvian silver mines, had led them here. Their estate, Blackwood Hall, was mortgaged to the hilt, its very foundation trembling beneath the weight of mountainous debt. Harrington was not a love match. He was a ledger, a line of credit, a desperate, final solution. Duty, her mother, the formidable Lady Alistair, had stressed over and over, clutching Clara's hand with icy resolve, is the first law of a noblewoman. Your happiness is a trifle compared to the solvency of your family. Clara accepted this law. She had buried her own dreams of a quiet life spent reading by a vast library fire, or perhaps even daring to feel genuine affection for a husband, beneath the necessity of the Alistair name. She would marry Harrington, and in exchange for her youth, beauty, and freedom, she would save her parents from ruin and the ignominy of social disgrace. It was a bargain as old as society itself, and one she was resigned to seal. The moment the music faltered, the room seemed to shift. Clara had been observing a trio of debutantes giggling over a misplaced glove when her gaze was drawn, inexplicably, towards the grand entrance. Standing just inside the threshold, yet seeming to command the entire space, was a man who belonged to no one's set, no one's circle. He was a stranger, and not one of the comfortably dull variety. His evening clothes were perfectly cut, yet worn with an air of careless confidence that suggested he was accustomed to power, but indifferent to society's rules. His height and broad shoulders cut a silhouette distinct from the pale, slender Englishmen around him. But it was his face that arrested her. Angular, intelligent, shadowed by hair the color of midnight, and dominated by a pair of eyes that seemed to possess a knowing intensity, as if he had read every secret hidden beneath the silks and diamonds of the room. He did not look like a gentleman seeking a dance or a card game. He looked like a wolf who had found his way into a well-stocked sheep pen. Lord Harrington, sensing her distraction, cleared his throat with aristocratic impatience. "Lady Clara, you appear preoccupied. Do you know that fellow?" Clara pulled her gaze away, feeling a strange, visceral jolt. "No, my lord, I have never seen him before."
"Good," Harrington sniffed, dismissing the stranger with a flick of his wrist. "Probably some parvenu invited by accident. They lack polish." But the stranger, oblivious or perhaps deliberately indifferent to Harrington's disdain, began to move through the crowd, not towards the host, but directly towards Clara. He moved with a focused intent that was deeply unsettling. He navigated the sea of silk and lace with the ease of a veteran sailor, his gaze never leaving her. When he finally reached her, he paused. The air around them suddenly felt charged, thin and electric. His eyes, the startling color of deep gray stone, met hers. For a breathless moment, the roar of the ballroom, the laughter, the gossip, the ceaseless rhythm of the orchestra vanished. She felt exposed, as if this man, in an instant, had seen past the ivory gown and the resigned smile to the desperate girl trapped within. "Lady Clara Alistair," he murmured, his voice low, a rich counterpoint to the dull cadence of Harrington's. It was a voice that commanded attention, entirely unlike the clipped, predictable tones of her peers. "You have the advantage, sir," she replied, summoning the icy composure she had been practicing since childhood. He gave a slight wry inclination of his head. "Elias Thorne, forgive my abruptness, but I was tasked with a small errand." Before Harrington could interject with a furious query as to his identity or purpose, Mr. Thorne reached into the breast pocket of his coat. His fingers brushed Clara's gloved hand as he smoothly placed a small, folded piece of parchment into her palm. The contact was brief, almost imperceptible, yet it sent a tremor up her arm. It was a connection, a breach of her carefully constructed defenses. "A private matter, my lord," Thorne said, his eyes now leveled at Harrington, in unmistakable challenge in their depth. "I am her betrothed, sir. Any matter pertaining to Lady Clara is a matter pertaining to me." "Indeed," Thorne returned, his expression now perfectly neutral, yet laced with a subtle menace. "But I assure you, Lord Harrington, this is a matter that only Lady Clara will fully appreciate. My duty is done." With a final, penetrating look at Clara, a look that seemed to hold both warning and a strange promise, Mr. Elias Thorne turned and melted back into the crowd, vanishing as quickly and dramatically as he had arrived. Clara's heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic, feathered thing trying to escape its cage. The anonymous, cryptic note felt hot in her hand, a dangerous coal she dared not drop. "What was that, Clara?" Harrington demanded, his face mottled with wounded pride. "Some foolish admirer. Give me that absurd note at once." "It is merely a reminder from my milliner, my lord, concerning a fitting. He clearly mistook the urgency. Do forgive me." Harrington, mollified by her dismissive tone and eager to resume his lecture on finance, accepted the explanation. But Clara barely heard the resumption of his drone. Her mind was racing, her thoughts consumed by the enigmatic Mr. Thorne. She endured another hour of the suffocating elegance, participating in the polite, empty exchanges required of her, until she could endure no more.
Claiming a sudden, desperate headache, she retired to a small, unused sitting room on the first floor, a quiet space dedicated to cards that was mercifully empty. The door clicked shut, muffling the distant music. Her breath hitched, and with trembling fingers she retrieved the note. It was not sealed with wax, merely folded tightly. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the elegant, forceful script written in black ink. Lady Clara, do not marry him. The cage you are entering is not one of gold, but of ruin. Your father's debt is a lie built on a greater deception. The truth is available, but the hour is late, and you must act now. Be at the Serpentine Bridge in Hyde Park at dawn, 5 a.m. tomorrow. Come alone. Only a desperate measure can save you from a desperate fate. A friend to justice. Clara reread the words, her mind utterly suspended between shock and a terrifying surge of hope. Do not marry him. The sentence was a shocking, beautiful rebellion, a direct challenge to the duty that had defined her existence. A lie built on a greater deception? Could it be possible that her ruin, the source of her family's debt, the reason for her impending sacrifice, was not merely the result of bad luck, but something darker? Something actively malevolent? The image of Elias Thorne flashed into her mind, the intensity of his eyes, the gravity of his purpose. He had not looked like a fool or a rogue. He had looked like a man who dealt in certainties, a man who saw the world as it truly was. He was the messenger, and the message promised not only salvation, but the chance to reclaim her own life. She looked out the window at the black silhouette of London, the city of secrets and shadows. To meet a man, a complete stranger at dawn, alone, on the Serpentine Bridge. It was the height of impropriety, a scandal that could instantly destroy her name even before Harrington's fortune could save it. But the alternative was Lord Harrington, the 8.5% yield, and a life spent in a gilded cell, knowing she had buried a lie. Clara crumpled the note and then instantly smoothed it out, hiding it once more in her reticule. Her heart, long dormant beneath the layers of duty and resignation, began to stir with an unfamiliar, frightening vitality. The fear of scandal warred with the desperate, glorious flicker of hope. She was a proper Victorian lady, bound by the strictest of codes, but tonight, on the eve of her doom, a handsome stranger had revealed a sliver of possibility. A desperate measure can save you from a desperate fate. She knew, with the certainty that burned away all reservation, that she would be at the Serpentine Bridge at dawn. She had been resigned to a life of quiet desperation. Now she was prepared to risk everything for the fire of truth. Part 2. Whispers behind closed doors. The air beneath the Serpentine Bridge was cold, carrying the damp, earthy scent of the park waking up. The clock had struck 5 just moments before, and the early morning mist hung like a curtain over the water, softening the sharp edges of the city. Lady Clara Alistair was cloaked and hooded, her identity swallowed by the anonymity of the darkness, her heart beating a frantic, uneven rhythm against her ribs. She felt less like a noblewoman and more like a character in one of the shilling dreadfuls her maid secretly devoured, a woman seeking a dangerous rendezvous. Elias Thorne was already there, leaning against the weathered stone balustrade, his hands tucked casually into his pockets. He was dressed less formally than the night before, in a heavy, dark coat that made him seem even more formidable, more a creature of the shadows than the ballroom. When he turned and saw her, a flash of recognition and perhaps approval crossed his features. "You came, Lady Clara," he stated, his voice quiet yet carrying easily in the stillness of the park. It was not a question, but an acknowledgement of her courage. Clara approached him, pulling her cloak tighter. She could feel the flush of impropriety on her cheeks, yet her desperation overshadowed her shame. "I am here, Mr. Thorne. Now be precise. What is the meaning of your note? What ruin are you speaking of? And how can you possibly know anything about my family's affairs?" He straightened, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I know a great deal, Lady Clara. I am not a disgruntled admirer, nor a common blackguard. I am a man who deals in accounts, and more specifically, a man who deals in truth." He did not immediately elaborate, instead focusing his unnerving attention on her. "Your father, Lord Alistair, believes his financial misfortune was the result of the collapsing Peruvian silver market. That is what he told you, is it not? Mismanagement and bad luck?" "It is the truth," Clara insisted, though a tremor of doubt ran through her. "It is a convenient lie," Thorne countered, stepping closer. The proximity was startling. No gentleman of her acquaintance would breach such a boundary of personal space. "I have spent the better part of a year investigating a network of predatory loans and false investments, targeting established but vulnerable noble families. Your father was one of the targets." He paused, letting the magnitude of his words sink in. "The Alistair debt is not merely high interest. It is a deliberate financial crime, a calculated scheme engineered to force the liquidation of your assets, most notably your land, Blackwood Hall." Clara gasped, the cold air suddenly insufficient to fill her lungs. "Preposterous! Who would orchestrate such a scheme, and for what purpose?"
The land, Lady Clara, not the silver, not the title, but the value beneath the earth. Blackwood Hall sits upon the most valuable, untapped seam of coal in the entire county. Someone very close to you, someone with intimate knowledge of your family's resources and dire need, arranged a collapse disguised as a misfortune, ensuring your father had no choice but to sell. "Who?" she whispered, her voice tight with rising horror. Thorne's gray eyes narrowed, filled with a deep, weary anger. "That is what we must uncover. But I can tell you this. The man who engineered the debt and is now waiting to purchase the estate, or acquire it through marriage, is one and the same." He did not need to say the name. A terrible, sick certainty bloomed in her chest. "Lord Harrington," Clara breathed out, the sound a mix of disbelief and utter revulsion. Over the next 3 days, Clara entered a double life. By day, she played the dutiful, elegant fiancée, enduring Lord Harrington's tedious pronouncements and society's congratulatory smiles. By night, she became Elias Thorne's accomplice, an operative in a clandestine investigation that felt lifted from the pages of a forbidden thriller. Their meetings were brief, perilous exercises in discretion. They used the shadowed alcoves of the British Museum Library, pretending to be students of ancient history, or the anonymous bustle of Covent Garden Market, speaking over baskets of wilting flowers. The danger of discovery was immense. A single whisper of her association with an unknown, unvetted man like Thorne would mean the instant severing of her engagement and the immediate public ruin of the Alistair name. Elias, she discovered, was an American, a fact that explained his lack of deference to London society, in a man of remarkable education and tenacity. He was, as she suspected, not a journalist, but an investigator hired by several European families who had suffered similar catastrophic, yet strangely specific, misfortunes. He was a man with a fierce, almost moralistic drive for justice, an outsider who saw through the hypocritical veneer of the aristocracy. During these meetings, the emotional tension between them grew taut, vibrating just beneath the surface of their desperate work. Elias treated her not as a fragile lady, but as an intellectual equal, a necessary partner in the pursuit of justice. He respected her mind, her ability to recall figures, and her knowledge of her father's papers. "Harrington has been far too gracious," Elias murmured to her one evening while ostensibly examining a rare edition in the museum's hushed halls. He offered terms of settlement that were suspiciously generous. "He is covering his tracks, offering a gilded exit to prevent an ugly inquiry." "My father would never willingly sell his birthplace for coal money," Clara insisted, running a gloved finger over a dusty spine. "No, but he would sign any document that promised to preserve his honor and provide for his family," Elias countered. "Harrington knows your father's weakness is pride. He offered salvation, and your father was too blinded by shame to examine the fine print." Clara felt a sickening wave of compassion for her father, realizing he was a victim, albeit a blind and foolish one, of a far more sophisticated villain. The climax of their investigation occurred late one rainy afternoon in a tiny rented room above a forgotten legal solicitor's office in the city. Elias had been pursuing the trail of a shell corporation Harrington had used to acquire the debts. He had managed to procure a set of duplicate ledgers, hidden from public record and meticulously maintained. Clara watched, breath held tight in her throat, as Elias spread the enormous, brittle pages across a cheap wooden table. The room was cold, lit only by a single kerosene lamp that cast long, accusing shadows. "Observe this, Lady Clara," Elias said, his finger tracing a line of scrawled figures. "The funds were moved from the Sociedad Minera Peruana account, the one your father invested in, directly into this entity, the Blackwood Development Trust. The transfer occurred 6 months before the silver market officially collapsed." Clara leaned over the pages, the terrible truth manifesting itself in black and white. "That means the collapse was not a cause of the debt, but a cover for the theft. The money was already gone." "Worse," Elias stated, his gaze meeting hers, the solemnity in his eyes crushing. "The signature authorizing the final, catastrophic loan, the one that forced your father's hand, is not Lord Alistair's." He pushed another paper towards her. It was a promissory note, dated 2 years prior, a staggering sum secured against the estate. The signature was a flawless forgery of her father's elegant hand. "Harrington is a very clever man," Elias explained, his voice low with controlled fury. "He did not forge it himself. He paid someone to do it. But the witness to the signature, the man who certified its authenticity—" He jabbed his finger at the final, looping signature at the bottom of the page. Clara's eyes fixed on the name. The kerosene lamplight seemed to flicker and distort the lettering, but the truth was undeniable in iron-wrought horror. Alistair W. The W stood for William, her father's trusted cousin. William Alistair, a man who served as their family's financial advisor and solicitor. The same man who had introduced her father to Harrington and who had spent the last year offering endless, soothing reassurance that the debt was merely a temporary misfortune.
The evidence was irrefutable. Harrington was the architect of the crime, seeking Blackwood's coal. But her own blood, her cousin William, was the willing accomplice who had signed the family's ruin into existence. Clara drew back, her breath catching in a strangled, desperate cry that she instantly suppressed. The betrayal was absolute, the scandal a gaping maw ready to swallow them whole. It was not mere mismanagement. It was a conspiracy of the cruelest, most intimate kind. "He is the snake in the garden," Elias stated, his hand reaching out, not quite touching her but hovering near, a gesture of profound, shared understanding.
They are in league. They were going to allow you to marry Harrington, thereby burying the scandal forever and rewarding your cousin for his silence. Clara stared at the pages, the cold facts transforming her fear into white-hot rage. She was not just a woman marrying for duty. She was a sacrificial pawn in a cynical game of greed. Her entire life, the reputation of her family, the freedom of her father, all were being traded for coal and cash by the very people she was meant to trust. She looked up at Elias, her eyes flashing with a desperate new resolve. The emotional chasm that had separated the proper Lady Clara from the investigative outsider had vanished. In the shared shadow of this devastating truth, they were allies, bound by a secret so explosive it could destroy the foundations of their world. "This changes everything," Clara said. Her voice steadied despite the seismic shift in her reality. "I cannot marry him. But if this evidence comes to light, my family will be ruined publicly and utterly. My father will be disgraced, or worse." "You have a choice, Lady Clara. You can save your family's name by marrying Harrington and burying this ledger forever, or you can save your family's honor by exposing the truth, facing the scandal, and trusting me to help you navigate the ruin." The choice was no longer between duty and happiness. It was between a life built on a comfortable lie and a truth that would demand everything she had. Part 3. The Price of Truth. The days that followed the revelation were an emotional crucible for Lady Clara. She moved through the grand, familiar rooms of her family home as though navigating a labyrinth of ghosts. Every piece of antique furniture, every portrait of a severe-looking ancestor seemed to whisper the word duty to her. Her mother, Lady Alistair, was busy with the final wedding preparations, the seating charts, the selection of the choir, the discussions of the settlement. Her happiness was fragile, resting entirely upon Clara's shoulders. To expose the truth was not just to break an engagement, it was to shatter her mother's hard-won peace and cast her father into the darkness of public condemnation. The thought of Lord Harrington, the architect of her family's near destruction, now filled her with a profound physical sickness. Yet the price of justice was catastrophic. Financial ruin meant the loss of their home, their status, and the very foundation of their lives. Elias Thorne was the only anchor in her gathering storm. Their necessary secrecy forced their emotional intimacy. They met not to exchange evidence, but to exchange fears, hopes, and declarations of defiance. Their conversation was no longer about ledgers and signatures, but about the nature of courage and the meaning of a life well lived. One evening, they met in the walled, overgrown garden of a recently abandoned manor house. The moonlight filtered through the dense foliage, creating patches of stark black and silver. Clara was distraught, tears of desperation finally breaching her carefully constructed composure.
"I am trapped, Elias," she confessed, her voice thick with anguish. "If I marry him, I preserve their security, but I sell my soul to a villain. If I expose him, I watch my family be destroyed, and I fear my father will never recover from the shame of his cousin's betrayal." Elias stepped closer, closing the small, agonizing distance between them. The intense, protective gaze she knew so well softened with an unexpected tenderness. "You believe you are choosing between two forms of ruin, Clara," he said, using her Christian name for the first time, the sound of it a profound, startling claim. "But there is a third path. You choose redemption. True redemption is not the preservation of appearances, but the defense of what is right." He reached out, his warm, strong hands gently framing her face. The roughness of his touch was a stark contrast to the pampered, gloved feel of her usual world. It was real, honest. "I know the risk is immense, but I swear to you, Lady Clara, if you choose truth, I will stand beside you. I will not let you face the scandal alone. You are not meant for a cold life of lies. You are meant for fire, for truth, and for a life earned, not bought." His confession was not a polite flirtation. It was a promise forged in the heat of shared danger. In that moment, surrounded by the shadows and the scent of damp earth, Clara realized that her heart, which she thought was resigned to cold duty, had awakened with a fierce, burning passion for this man. He saw her courage, not her title. He loved her conviction, not her dowry.
He leaned in, his intent clear, undeniable. Her breath hitched. The kiss was not the controlled, formal salute she expected from a gentleman. It was a claiming, a passionate and overwhelming surge of connection that stole the air from her lungs and sent a tremor of fierce, unexpected joy through her entire being. It was a kiss that sealed their dangerous pact, the pact between a noblewoman and an outsider, between duty and desire. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were shadowed with emotion. "That," he murmured, his voice husky, "is the truth I want you to choose, Clara." The confrontation came 3 days later, at the engagement ball, the final celebratory gathering before the wedding. It was held in the Alistair town residence, a scene of forced gaiety and brittle elegance. Clara, dressed in a magnificent gown of sapphire blue, moved through the room with a terrifying calm. Lord Harrington was beside her, basking in the glow of his imminent acquisition. Cousin William Alistair hovered nearby, his perpetual nervous smile grating on Clara's raw nerves. As the orchestra struck up the opening waltz, Harrington offered his arm. This was the moment. She felt Elias's presence keenly. He stood unobtrusively near the entrance, a silent sentinel, ready to act on her signal. Harrington began to lead her onto the floor, but Clara, gently yet firmly, removed her arm from his. The small action was enough to still the conversation around them. "Lady Clara, is something amiss?" Harrington asked, his tone laced with possessive annoyance. Clara turned to face him, drawing the attention of every peer, every society figure, every gossip-monger in the room. The silence was instantaneous and absolute, a terrible vacuum awaiting the truth. "Yes, my lord," she said, her voice clear and carrying, infused with a righteous strength she never knew she possessed. "Something is amiss." She looked directly into his cold, calculating eyes. "I regret to inform this distinguished company that the forthcoming marriage has been cancelled. I cannot, in good conscience, marry a man I know to be a thief, a conspirator, and a blackguard." A collective gasp swept the room. Harrington's face contorted, shifting from shock to furious purple indignation. "What slander is this?" he roared, sacrificing all pretense of gentlemanly decorum. "You are hysterical, Lady Clara. You know nothing of my affairs." "I know everything," Clara countered, her gaze unwavering. She pointed a sharp, accusing finger toward William Alistair, who had gone pale and was attempting to slip away. "I know that you, Lord Harrington, conspired with my cousin, William Alistair, to forge my father's signature on a ruinous loan 6 months after transferring the Alistair investment funds into your own Blackwood Development Trust." "Lies," he bellowed. "Where is your proof?" Elias Thorne, moving swiftly and silently, appeared at Clara's side, placing a thick, leather-bound book onto a nearby card table with a resounding thud. It was the duplicate ledger. "The proof is here, my lord," he stated, his voice ringing with authority. "Irrefutable records of conspiracy, fraud, and forgery, witnessed by numerous individuals who suffered similar fates. This is not a story of mismanagement, it is a crime that reaches into the highest tiers of society. The ensuing chaos was deafening. Whispers exploded into shouts. Lady Alistair screamed, burying her face in her husband's shoulder. Lord Alistair, utterly stunned, stared from his daughter to the ledger. William Alistair, seeing his escape foiled, made a dash for the door, only to be detained by two watchful men who had accompanied Elias. The scandal that broke the following day was magnificent in its destruction. It eclipsed every other event of the season. Lord Harrington's reputation collapsed instantly, followed quickly by the seizure of his assets and an investigation into the charges of conspiracy. William Alistair was arrested. The Alistairs were ruined. Financially, they lost the remnants of their fortune and most of their land, though with Elias's shrewd counsel, Blackwood Hall was saved from Harrington's grip, now shrunken but secured. Socially, they were pariahs. But Lady Clara, paradoxically, was free. She had chosen truth over comfort, integrity over duty. She had lost her fortune, but she had gained her conscience. She was no longer the quiet, desperate daughter. She was a courageous woman who had brought down one of the most powerful and corrupt men in London. In the ensuing weeks, as the dust settled on the wreckage of their former lives, Clara and Elias worked tirelessly to piece together the remnants of her family's affairs. They were constantly together, their alliance solidifying into an unbreakable bond. The emotional intensity born of shared danger matured into a deep, abiding, and passionate love. One quiet afternoon, months after the scandal, they sat together in the humble drawing room of a small house Clara's father had managed to retain. The room was simple, filled not with gilded excess, but with books and sunlight. "We has nothing now, Elias," Clara said, looking around the modest room. "No prestige, no wealth. We are outcasts."
Elias took her hand, his thumb tracing the soft line of her wrist. He looked at her, his eyes warm with the love that had sustained them both through the storm. "We have everything, my heart," he corrected. "We have truth and we have each other. I viewed you not as a noblewoman, but as a courageous equal, and you proved me right. I promised you a life earned, not bought. And I want to spend that life with you, Lady Clara, not in the society that discarded us, but here, building something honest, something real." He kissed her hand, the gesture profound and respectful. Clara smiled, a genuine, luminous expression that had been hidden beneath years of expectation. She had traded a gilded cage for an uncertain future, a dreary alliance for a passionate truth. "Then let us build it, Mr. Thorne," she whispered, her heart finally, gloriously free. "Let us build it from fire and truth." The noblewoman who had to marry for money had sacrificed everything to expose a dark secret, and in doing so, had found a love that was richer, deeper, and more magnificent than any fortune.